everyone. Thanks for joining us. We are live on Zoom and live streaming to YouTube. In just a minute, I'll introduce our two guests for today. But before that, a reminder that if you're watching on YouTube, you can join us in the Zoom meeting for these events. To get the login info, go to our meetup group, and from there, you will be able to get the login information. So you want to join us there at meetup.com/CFL Freethought. And be sure to RSVP for upcoming online events and put them on your calendar. This event is part of our reoccurring educational events that we will continue to stream as YouTube events until we can meet again indoors. You can find all of our past educational events and follow us on YouTube at youtube.com/CFL Freethought. After the presentation today, and before we leave you, I'm going to give you an update on our outdoor in-person events. We actually have 2 in April. Also, be sure to keep in mind that we send out a monthly email update for upcoming events and activities, all of which are online right now, other than the 2 coming up in April. So go to tinyurl.com/CFFC newsletter. Give us your email and any other contact information that you like, and we promise to send out that email to you. Of course, we hope that you're already following us on Facebook. You can find us there at CFL Freethought. If you're with us in Zoom today, your microphone will be kept on mute so you don't actually accidentally interrupt the presentation. If you keep your camera on, please avoid any visual distractions on camera. You can find the chat option available at the bottom of your screen on your computer. Feel free to chat with one another there. If you're on a mobile device, you just have to tap the screen and that option will actually appear. And the chat is where we want you to ask questions today. So add those there and we'll get to as many of them as we can. We're going to be monitoring the live chat on YouTube. So for anyone there, you can comment there as well. And we will, again, try to bring your questions over into the conversation we're having today. So with that, let's get started. Today, we have 2 wonderful advocates today who are going to explain the challenges Florida is facing with our current legislative session, which got underway this month in Tallahassee. Allison Gill is an accomplished attorney and a nationally recognized expert on LGBTQ law. Allison directs the American Atheist Legal and Legislative Advocacy Strategy. She trains state and local advocates and represents the American Atheists in Washington, D.C. Allison received her BA in molecular biology and biochemistry from Rutgers University and her JD from George Washington University Law School. Dr. Devin Graham was raised near Pittsburgh in an evangelical Christian home, the grasp of which she's only freed herself from in about 2016. With a PhD in toxicology from the University of Maryland, she is currently in Tallahassee researching the development and treatment of neuropsychiatric disorders at a local university. She's the president of the Humanist of Tallahassee and assistant state director in Florida for American Atheists. And Dr. Graham has been speaking at the committee meetings of the Florida legislature and working hard to get voices like ours heard. So welcome to you both.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, and thank you so much for inviting us to speak today. So I'll start by going over, well, actually, why don't I start by sharing our slides? Okay, so that should be good. Does everyone see slides? Yeah?
Yes,
okay,
looks good.
Beautiful. So today we're going to be talking about both a little bit broader what's happening across the country and then narrowing in and looking at what's happening in Florida in terms of legislative activity this year. And just to give you a preview, it's not great. Most of it's bad, unfortunately. So as far as our agenda, we're going to be talking about basically more broadly the state of religious equality in Florida, what it looks like, what laws and policies are currently on the books. And then Devin will mostly focus on the 2021 Florida legislative session, what's happening this year and what bills we're watching. And then lastly, we'll talk about advocacy tools and resources and how you can best engage in work to stop these negative bills. So to get started, I first want to talk to you about our annual report that American Atheist puts out every year. It's called the State of the Secular States. And its most recent version we put out in January was the 2020 State of the Secular States report. We've put out 2 previous versions for 2018 and 2019. So this is the 3rd iteration of the report. and it's available at atheist.org/states, both the full report itself, and also you can pull up just a specific scorecard for Florida to look at the state laws and policies which are in that state. So what this report does is it provides like a benchmark. It looks at all the different laws and policies across each state, and also Puerto Rico and DC, that affect the separation of religion and government and religious equality. So it looks at over 40 different items of law and policy in every state. So it's kind of a massive report. It also analyzes, it describes what each of these items are in some detail, and then provides a scorecard so you have a quick reference easily in each state. There are 4 broad areas that the report looks at: constitutional and non-discrimination protections, education and youth, healthcare and wellness, and special privileges for religion. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the details. I'll show you actually Florida's scorecard, which will be helpful to understand what this looks like. In this new iteration of the report, that we made several different changes. First of all, we added a provision, mostly positive, around non-discrimination on the basis of religion, which also includes non-religious people. So it's a little bit confusing, but if you're not allowed to discriminate based on religious perspective, that includes both, people that are religious and people that are non-religious. And so many states actually have those protections in different areas, such as housing, employment, education, etc. We also looked at homeschooling laws, which I think are particularly important this year and last year, given the amount of people that are homeschooling for the first time. And unfortunately, most states have a pretty woeful record when it comes to homeschooling laws. They have very inadequate laws that don't provide enough protection for young people, and some don't even prevent abuse, unfortunately. We also look at state sales tax and whether some states have specific privileges for religious organizations when it comes to state sales tax that don't apply to other nonprofits. And we look at clergy privilege, sometimes called clergy penitent privilege, which has to, if you think about the Catholic Church, for example, they are not required to testify when what is revealed during a confessional. That's called clergy privilege. In some states, there's an exception for child abuse. In most states, there's not. So let's talk about rankings. So we rank the states into 3 broad categories based on the level of protections in those states. There are states which we call strong protections for religious equality, about 13 states. States like California, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., which I guess is a territory. And, there they have the most protections. Not only do they have religious equality, but they have the most protections for religion-based harm. For example, stopping things like conversion therapy or ending child marriage, for example, are good examples. Then we have the basic separation of religion and government states. So these are states sort of in the middle, which is 18 states and territories. And then lastly, we have the religious exemptions that undermine equality states, which does include Florida, which makes up 21 states and includes numerous religious exemptions to the law, which undermine the separation of religion and government, unfortunately, and allow religious organizations sometimes special privileges to be exempt from the law in different areas. So let's look at Florida's scorecard. And I apologize, I know this is super tiny and hard to read, but I encourage you to go to the website for the report, which again is atheist.org/states, and it's very easy to pull up. And I'm also going to go through in a moment the highlights from this in a different slide. It's easier to read. But you can see it's broken up into 4 main areas, and for each policy item, the icon next to it denotes whether it's a positive or negative item, and whether it's present or absent in the state. So if it's blue, it's positive, and if it's red, it's negative. And also if it's filled in, that means that law or policy is present in the state. So it can be a little bit confusing to understand the key there. But so things that are filled in are present, and those that are empty are absent. And so let me go through some of the details here. So Florida has strong protections similar to the US Constitution in its own constitution. For example, it has something like the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause in its state constitution. It also has what's called a No Aid Clause, which is similar to one in a few different states that have these different types of constitutional provisions that prevent requirements to fund Florida also has a requirement to fund public education as well as a new aid clause. And that's been used in the past in Florida to strike down voucher school programs that transferred too much money from public schools to private schools. Unfortunately, these provisions have really been undermined in the last year by the Supreme Court. And so we know that there's going to be additional challenges to that constitutional provisions in Florida. And it's unclear, especially given the people that have been nominated to the Florida State, Supreme Court, whether those provisions will hold and continue to prevent just a wholesale giveaway through vouchers to private religious schools. So more on that in a few minutes. Florida also has non-discrimination laws that include protections against discrimination based on religion in a few different areas, and that does include non-religious people. Florida, unfortunately, has very few positive protections against things like child marriage, conversion therapy, or education neglect through homeschooling. So there's very limited protections in those areas where religion harms people, especially young people. They're almost non-existent in Florida. However, there are numerous laws inserting religion into schools, and this is one of the areas that Florida does the worst of the states, unfortunately. For example, there's laws that actively insert religion into schools, abstinence-only education, where there's actually specific requirements to teach the benefits of heterosexual marriage. So not just marriage, but heterosexual marriage. There's some more recent requirements, like requirement to have "In God We Trust" posters in classrooms, which was passed in 2018. So the requirement to have in every classroom an "In God We Trust" poster in the state, which I don't know if you've ever seen those, but they tend to be very large and sort of dominating "In God We Trust" in large letters. So it's a very clear message about, what people should believe, unfortunately, just inserted into the classroom. There's a law allowing school personnel to participate in voluntary student-initiated religious activities, either before or after the school day. So, for example, praying with students at the flagpole in the morning or after school at different events. And that was passed in 2019. Now, we think there are some real constitutional issues with that law, but for now it is on the books. And like I said, it just passed in 2019. Some of the bills we're seeing concerning young people is sort of just a negligent lack of concern for youth, such as the lack of sufficient protections for youth being homeschooled, non-medical exemptions to vaccination. There's broad exceptions to allow to basically opt out of vaccination requirements for non-medical reasons, often based on religion or just personal reasons. And laws, I already mentioned that. And of course, there are vouchers and tax credit programs. And Florida has some of the worst, is one of the worst states in this area, unfortunately. There were 4 separate programs that divert money away from public schools and to private religious schools in Florida. So 4 separate programs. And this year, Devin will talk about in a few minutes, there's actually a bill to sort of consolidate those and even amplify them. So there's a joke that Florida has never seen a voucher bill that it doesn't like. And unfortunately, that's sort of the record in the state. The last one to pass was in 2019. And so I just want to point out, as I say at the bottom of the slide, I mentioned 3 different bills that passed in 2018 and 2019. Florida has not the best record in this area, and they're rapidly passing bills to undermine the separation of religion and government, and it's getting worse. Devin's going to point out a number of bills that they're tackling this year, which would further this sort of trend. So it's fairly negative, unfortunately. In terms of religious exemptions, Florida has a Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which can be used to create an exemption whenever religious exercise is burdened. There are allowances to deny medical care relating to abortion and contraception based on religious beliefs. And there are numerous special tax benefits given to religious organizations that are not given to other types of nonprofits. So with that cheerful overview, let's go into what the legislative update looks like this current year. Actually, before I do that, why don't we just take a second and see if there's any questions? And I promise you, it's all not going to be this negative. It's just I need to be realistic about where Florida is currently so we can talk about how to improve it. And that's sort of what we did here. Any questions so far, Jocelyn?
Yeah, there was one really large question. There are some, based on the scorecard, negative provisions in place. And based on the scorecard, should we be then identifying them and actively working to replace them? And if so, how? Or should we be focusing on new bills that are coming in? Like, how do we take all this information and turn it into action, I guess?
That's a great question. And I think it's a both end. Yeah, I think it's important to stop new legislation from being passed into law, but also working to, over time, build momentum to overturn some of this negative legislation laws that are already on the books. I
Okay.
think I think it's a more immediate problem to stop bad bills from being passed. And it's sort of a background issue to sort of build up support for what we can do to advance religious equality, if that makes sense. So it is possible to do both at the same time. A lot of building momentum occurs in the off season of the legislature too. So a lot of that work can be done not in the mad rush to stop the negative legislation, but after the session ends and you have a chance to really build up support and momentum over time.
It takes some planning, I suspect,
Absolutely.
which I think we're trying to do here in Florida, but it's still developing. Another question was, do any of the laws that you've been talking about reflect Project Blitz? Because we've talked about that in the past.
Quite a few, actually. I mentioned a few that passed in the last several years. The In God We Trust in schools, that's a pretty emblematic Project Blitz bill we've seen all across the country. And Florida has had a few leaders that are very well known in Project Blitz, including one prominent Democrat who lost her seat recently, Kim Daniels, who was one of the leaders of Project Blitz. And yes, I see Devin clapping. We're all excited about that. And there are several others. But yes, several of these bills are Project Blitz type bills. And also, Florida has really been at the forefront for voucher type bills. And those are not associated with Project Blitz, but that's its own independent negative legislative push, unfortunately.
Okay. And so we are seeing actual traction, unfortunately, with Project Blitz. There was a note to correct the record on the bill. It's about the 201 IGWT bill. It's required in each building used by the district school board and not in every classroom. Just an FYI. That was a note that popped up.
Yeah, there's variations on that bill. Some states require every classroom. Some states just say it has to be in every building, in a prominent location in every building. So
it's also our state motto, and it's on our flag. So the flag is displayed in every school. So that actually counts for a lot of places, which is. I don't have my microphone on. Sorry. So the flag, it's on our flag, the state flag, and so a lot of places will allow that.
Oh, interesting.
So
that's a way to get.
I think in my kids' school that's how it is. The flag will count as the display of the In God We Trust.
Right, and it's also on the dollar bill, which probably doesn't make it any easier. The last question that I had was, and again, I think you pretty much answered it, but who is primarily responsible for the bills that are harmful to the state-church separation? Are we seeing one particular group? Or are we seeing it coming from a variety of different groups that just happen to be helping each other, if that makes sense?
I think that the latter. There's different groups that have similar interests and they're all attacking from different places. Like, for example, the voucher bills are coming from a different source than the Project Blitz bills. And I feel like there are numerous sort of nonprofits and other groups like the family policy groups in Florida that are helping to advance this as well. So it's more like a constellation of efforts rather than like a single concerted sort of push on a few of these different areas.
Yeah, I think Senator Dennis Baxley from West Central Florida is a primary person who's behind a lot of this as well, if I remember correctly.
You're absolutely right.
Okay, that's all we have for right now, so I'll hand it back over.
Okay, great. So let's go into the Florida legislative update. And before Devin starts to tell you about what's specifically going on in Florida, I want to just talk about what's happening across the country. So this year has been, unfortunately, extremely bad in terms of negative legislation. It's been worse than we've seen in maybe 5 years. And that's for a variety of reasons. First of all, there were numerous really negative, unfortunately, Supreme Court decisions last year and the year before, which sort of undermine or open the door to allow more negative legislation in places like Florida, especially around things like vouchers. And there's also, I feel like because there was not much legislation last year, the groups that were really pushing on culture war and negative legislative issues really sort of bided their time and doubled their efforts this year. Because all across the country, we're just seeing waves of negative legislation. And so one of the most, I think, important areas is religious exemptions to public health orders. So, for example, let's say a governor says, you must socially distance while in church, or churches are limited for a certain period of time, like they can't have in-person gatherings larger than 50 people, whatever the requirements are. There are exemptions sort of coming from the legislature saying you can't assign any exemption, you can't assign any public health restrictions at all, or they're very, very narrowly sort of regulated. And some of these are really avenues to sort of advance much broader religious exemptions that are not even limited to the pandemic, unfortunately. So they're sort of like a Trojan horse, if you will, to advance really, really broad religious exemptions. And we're seeing some of that in Florida as well, unfortunately. There's also been a real push on school vouchers this year, especially after a Supreme Court case last year called Espinoza, which sort of opened the door to more of these. We've seen a number of anti-LGBTQ bills across the country, especially anti-trans legislation, especially dealing with young people. And, I think there's some thought that that's a reaction to the Bostock case at the Supreme Court. But I also think it's just that the opponents of LGBTQ equality realize that they sort of have, they're able to sort of form a wedge by attacking the most vulnerable students, like trans students in schools, and sort of create that opening, which is really sad. And Devin's going to talk about some of those bills in Florida. And we've also seen some other religious exemptions in healthcare. One I feel is really notable. We're seeing really broad denial of care laws. Now, a denial of care law basically means that a provider or a hospital can choose not to offer a particular type of care or care to particular types of people based on their religious beliefs. And Florida already has some of those in the law. Like, for example, hospitals do not have to offer abortion care in Florida. And that's been pushed in many, many states over the years. These bills are like a whole new level. They allow any payer, like including insurance companies and employers, hospitals, providers, to opt out of any type of care, not just abortion care, but any type of care that they disagree with on a religious or moral principle. So like if you think that overweight people should not be getting heart care, that's fine. You know what I mean? It can be very, very broad. And I'm surprised that we're seeing this, frankly, because it's just so outrageous. But we've already seen one state, Arkansas, pass a bill like this through the legislature. And Arkansas is not that far away from Florida. So it's really kind of worrisome that we might see in other places. We're also seeing either widening non-medical exemptions to vaccination, or some states don't allow non-medical exemptions and they're adding them in to allow people to opt out of vaccination requirements. This usually has to do with schools. And so a lot of it is sort of driven by fear of people being forced to take a COVID vaccine, even though that's ridiculous. And no one's forcing. There's no state that's trying to force people to take a COVID vaccine, but it can being used as a driver. So that's what we're seeing all across the country. And now I will turn it over to Devin to talk about the particulars from Florida.
Hooray! I can't begin to tell you how much I love this stuff. I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawyer. I never liked politics, but this stuff is fun for me. So before I get started, I need to say that American Atheist, Humanists of Tallahassee, you guys are all 501c3s. We have to remain nonpartisan, but I think it's safe to say that there is usually one side of the aisle that does not a huge fan of the separation of church and state. Not always true with individuals on the other side, but we have lost a lot of defenders, progressive people, defenders of the separation of church and state in the legislature this past election cycle. And they've been replaced with some people who do not like us, I guess. And so we have a bit of a red wave in Florida this past year, we can say, and it's it is these, you can tell these views are really being pushed through. And so just these are some of the bills that we're going to go over. If you'll notice, I have the Senate number and the House number there. Just really briefly, we have the House, the Senate, people file bills. The leadership, which in this case is the Republican side, assigns it on both sides to committees, generally 3. It has to be passed through all 3 committees, and then there goes for a vote before the full chamber. It has to be voted both through the House side and the Senate side. So if you see these bills that have just the SB, it's only on the Senate side. However, if a bill is passed all the way through the Senate side, the House can adopt it as is. So this isn't just because you just see, well, this is only on the Senate side, therefore this will never become law. That's not true. That the other side can take this as is and vote it through the full chamber. So there's a possibility these can still go through. So I'm going to go through each of these individually. I'm not going to really discuss them on this slide necessarily. So let's just get into it. I think next slide, please. Okay. So SB 4848, this is called the Educational Scholarship Programs. It's a school voucher program is what it is. And Allison mentioned this before. This is going to be a radical transformation of Florida's voucher program. So how it's couched is that we have several different funding sources for education. There's like the Maclay scholarships, McGardner scholarships. There's a bunch of these funds, I guess. And what they're talking about is just streamlining them, combining them into one, and so it would make auditing easier. And that's how this bill is being couched. What it's doing, though, it's allowing for students that have never been in public school, so private school students, homeschool students, they can now receive taxpayer funding to the same extent as public school kids. And so it also removes any need-based eligibility requirements. So usually if a child, if they're going to receive one of these types of scholarships, they have to have a financial need for that. And that is being eliminated. So a family that earns $80,000 a year can now qualify for money to go to a private religious school instead. This would just means more taxpayer funding going to these private religious schools, which we know based on, like, I believe one of your representatives, Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith, is a huge opponent of voucher school programs, and he's done a lot of activism in terms of these. And most of these schools, I mean, some of them are okay, but a lot of them have discriminatory practices against LGBTQ students or even their parents. There's no oversight. The facilities can be non-existent in some cases. So this bill just means more funding going to these schools. And so the status of this is actually, it's already passed all 3 committees that it's been assigned to. So now it's in the Senate already for a final vote. I don't know when it's going to be voted on. That's going to probably be a little later in the session. But as I said, this can be passed over to the House, and the House can adopt this as is and by voting on it. So that's a little scary, but that's one that we're looking up. And I should say, when I say we, I'm one of the co-chairs with Sarah Ray of Polk County and of the Florida State Legislative Action Team, which is a pilot program from American Atheist. Jocelyn's on this as well. And what we're doing is we're trying to kind of drum up awareness of some of the really, really bad bills that are coming through the legislature this year. And so we're just starting. I hope if you have any interest, let us know. But this has been a fun learning experience for all of us, and see what we can do in the legislature. So these are the bills that we've prioritized as a team. So I feel like I need to say that. And so next slide, please. And this actually, Allison just got done talking about this. This is a bill by the esteemed Senator Dennis Baxley. This is a Medical Ethics and Diversity Act. And what this is just a broad religious refusal in medicine. This is a late file. We didn't really see this coming until he did it at the very last minute. And so it kind of just showed up and everyone's like, oh crap, this is not good. So what it allows for is a blanket exemption for healthcare professionals, and that's not really, they don't really say like the extent of that. So that's both dentistry, visual, your optometrist, I'm assuming. I don't think that's like a real specific a group of professionals. It's very broad, yeah. Got the okay from Allison on that one. It also covers institutions as well, so hospitals, practices, as well as insurance companies. So they don't have to pay if they don't agree with what the procedure you had was. So they can choose to discriminate based on their quote unquote personal religious, moral, ethical, or philosophical beliefs or principles. And that's a really, really broad. That's not just religious. That's just, I have a strong belief in this, and so therefore I'm not going to, I don't know, take that polyp off of whatever. I don't know. So it's really broad. And so also these professionals and these businesses or companies are not liable for quote unquote exercising their rights of conscience. So you can't fire a doctor for not doing something that's totally within their right to do whatever they feel like doing. So where this stands currently, this was a late file, so it wasn't assigned to committees quickly, but it was assigned to committees. It's just not moving yet. So that's kind of where we wanted to stay. Once it gets on the agenda, that's when the ball starts rolling, and it's going to be heard before these committees and move on through the process.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
And I love the Orwellian name of this bill as we see it across the country, the Medical Ethics and Diversity Act. And their framing is, well, they're trying to increase the diversity of people who can provide medical care, because otherwise, if you force people to provide medical care who actually need it, then you're excluding some doctors who would rather discriminate. So it's diversity, which is kind of absurd.
That's how diversity works. No, it's not. So that's another bill we're following currently, but luckily it's just not moving. So fingers crossed it stays that way. This is the bill that I could talk about literally all day long. This is Senate Bill 282, House Bill 529, and this is the moments of silence in public schools. This is not the first time this has been through the legislature. It's actually made it all the way through the House last year, was voted in, but the Senate stopped it at the very end. It didn't get a full vote in the Senate. And I believe it actually went through the year before as well. And so what this does is it takes a statute that's numbered 1003.45, and I hate the fact that I know that by heart, and it will amend it to make a moment of silence mandatory in all public schools across the state. So what the state statute is actually called is something along the lines of the teaching of Bible and religion in schools and the permitting a moment of silence. And what it was currently in the books is that any school district or any county in the state can mandate a moment of silence within that district, or they can also mandate an elective for Bible and religion as well. But they can mandate this moment of silence district-wide. The law of the land currently allows any individual child in the country to have a moment of silence or a prayer at school if they so wish, as long as it's not disruptive and doesn't infringe on the rights of others. So what this bill does is it's making this mandatory across the state. So it's kind of taking that home rule thing, what the school board thinks is best for their own school district, and just throwing that out the window. As I said, the statute itself is religious in nature. It discusses the words Bible and religion. The sponsors often say that this isn't religious because we actually took the word prayer out of it. And that's just kind of, okay, sure, why not? But what's interesting is that if you compare the 529-282 to what's currently in the books in Georgia, it's nearly identical in terms of what it does. Georgia's bill in the books currently is non-sectarian, does not mention prayer, super generic, just talks about moment of silence. But what happened this past year in their legislature is that they had a Democratic representative put forth a bill that would allow for students to stand up and say a very Christian prayer that said something along the lines of, bless all the children here, bless the faculty and staff, protect them from evil, in Jesus Christ's name, amen. And if that's not the sectarian, I truly don't know what is. And so we're viewing this moment of silence as kind of a step in the door to getting coerced prayer into school. What's interesting about how this bill is worded is that there are no guidelines whatsoever. It's always just the teacher has to tell the students to talk to their parents about it. The parents will talk to their kids. I can guarantee most parents are not going to talk to their kids about this. There are no opt-outs, so a student can't opt out. They just have to, quote unquote, sit through it and deal with it, which means that they're not getting these potential benefits that these sponsors claim there are. I don't know, I've testified against this every time it's come up, and Rep. Fine and I, Rep. Randy Fine, who's the House sponsor, this was Kim Daniels last year, but Rep. Randy Fine and I have gotten into a few I don't know, tiffs, I guess you could say. Friendly Atheist picked up on his first meeting and his first testimony where he said that if we had a mandatory moment of silence, it could prevent a Parkland type tragedy. The mayor of Parkland was sitting right there. She was the mayor of Parkland at the time, and she kind of lost it on him. It was beautiful, but so this is actually passed through every single House committee so far, and it was voted on Thursday in the House, so it's actually passed entirely. So where it stands in the Senate, and this is again Senator Baxley who is running this through the Senate, it was on the first committee happened. It passed through the first committee, but it hasn't been agenda'd yet. And so I'm not sure if they were waiting to see how it did in the House, or if they don't really care about this anymore because it got a lot of negative press. So we'll see. But as of now, it's just sitting, waiting for it to be agenda'd in the second committee on Senate. There's nothing we can do about it in the House now.
I was going to say, because we've been talking about it, I think the other part to this is also that the teachers are required to call all the parents. So now the teachers have to have that conversation, which I think is really important, because people think about it in one way, but it also adds work. I don't know if anybody's ever opened a classroom, but you're there taking roll, making sure everybody's there, et cetera, et cetera. So it also adds work for the teachers, which I think is an argument that might be able to cross.
Yeah. So I can't imagine being a teacher, honestly. I admire everything that they do, and I can't imagine having to do an additional thing like this, like calling every parent and asking them to talk to their kids about a moment of silence. So the videos are hysterical if you ever want to watch these through committee. So they're great. But so that's the status of the moment of silence in Florida currently. So next we have a very similar one. This is SB 880, House Bill 1027, and it's called Opening Remarks at High School Athletic Contests. This was actually in a response to a lawsuit against the Florida High School Athletic Association. So back in 2015, two Christian schools, Cambridge Christian and University Christian, made it all the way to the state 2A championships. This was the final game was being held in the Orange Bowl or Citrus Bowl or some sort of public arena. Both schools wanted to have a prayer before the start of the game over the loudspeaker, and the Florida High School, the FHSAA said no, because this is this is a state operated run, blah, blah, blah. We can't let you do this. So Cambridge sued FHSAA, and I think it's back to the lower courts. I'm not really sure the exact status of that lawsuit, but this bill is in response to that. So what it is a school may allow for a 2-minute, not a moment of silence, but an announcement before a game by a speaker of their choosing. So the school chooses a person from their community, from the school, wherever, to give a 2-minute opening remark. And then but they're not liable somehow for what that person says, there are a lot of liability issues. It's not clear, like if a student comes up and prays and says, I want the other team smited, or if they pray to I don't know, some other god, and that really offends all the Christians or something. I don't know, but there's a lot of liability issues because the school is the one who chose the person to speak, but therefore they should be liable for what is being said. So this was a really interesting bill, and it was in the same committee as the transports bill this past Tuesday in the House. And what I wasn't expecting is that the sponsor would be so honest with his words. And so I believe this is Rep. Barnaby, and he said something along the lines of, "We opened the House with, just say it, prayer, and no one complained about it. If it's good enough for us, it's good enough for our children. Let's use common sense. And if we adults can have a prayer and be happy about it, why not our kids?" And at which point, I think I got like 10 texts from people like, "Did you just hear that?" I was like, "I heard it. Yep. This is not surprising." So this is very similar to like the moment of silence type things that it's going on in Montana right now. Montana, a representative wants to have a moment of silence in their schools, and he just said, it's going to be a prayer. It's fine. This is just, it makes me scream, but there is going through. It passed through the first House committee on Tuesday. It's going to be heard on the first Senate committee this coming Tuesday. So that's where that stands. This is something that will probably likely at least make it through the House. Senate, we'll see. So next we're going to go.
I just wanted to make, I wanted to interrupt quickly, sorry. I wanted to say that the CFFC with our, the FFRF, our national parent organization, filed a friend of the court brief early in that actual case. So we're familiar with it, and it's also in Orlando. And the law is being somewhat misunderstood. If passed, it only applies to championship games managed by the FHSAA and not all school sports. Mm-hmm. Also, it does not all of a sudden make these prayers constitutional, just legal under a new constitutional law. We fully expect there to be more litigation against them, not less. And obviously school prayer is very different than legislative prayer in our opinion, but just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah. So, but again, this is just one of those bills that's just, I can't believe this is happening, but this is Florida. Okay, this is another one. Oh God, I hate this one so much. This is Senate 582, House 241, and it's called the Parental Bill of Rights. We like to call it the Parental Bill of Wrongs. And if you read the bill, it's very much couched as this is a way for parents to really get involved in their kids' education, to be an active a proponent of their child. And what it does is just take the parents, it takes the child's civil rights away. So this is opposed heavily by LGBTQ equality groups for obvious reasons. So if a student has issues at home, we know that not all parents are great. Let's be honest. But if a child goes to a school counselor and discusses, "Hey, I'm gay. I can't deal with this. This is not something I can talk to my parents about," or, "Hey, I might be an atheist. My religious beliefs are different than those of my parents." If the parent requests it, the counselor or the teacher must divulge that confidential information to the parents, which kind of goes against the code of ethics for counselors, but that's beside the point. A lot of these things are already in our statutes, but they're just kind of put together more and maybe a little more accessible now by putting them into this one bill. Parents can remove children from quote unquote harmful lessons that contradict their ideas of morality, sex, or religion. So, parents don't believe in evolution, pull your kid out of science class. You believe the flat earth, same thing. You don't believe the Holocaust happened or that the Civil War was just for states' rights. I don't even know, but you can pull your kids out of history class or any of those types of classes just because you don't agree with them. It allows for exemptions for school vaccinations, as well as denial of healthcare. And I was thinking about this more, the denial of healthcare bit, and I think this is where we can actually have we have a lot of issues with this one. So a student is allowed under federal law to seek STI testing, pregnancy testing, some substance abuse counseling and mental health counseling. That's allowed. Everything else, a child is going to have to get their parents' permission to go to get taken care of. And so there are a lot of religious sects out there that don't want their child being seen by a doctor, like having blood transfusions or getting certain types of medical care. This is where if a child says, I really want to have this procedure done because it will save my life, but my parents don't believe in that, that can be an issue. And that is something that they would have to get parents' permission in order to seek that type of care. I think that's a really important point, and so something to keep in mind. One thing about this bill that is really scary is that if teachers do not comply, they will be criminally liable, and all they're doing is really trying to care for the safety and welfare of their students. Sadly, this passed the second committee in the House the other day, and it's on the agenda for its second committee in the Senate this Tuesday. Tuesday's gonna be a very busy day. One of the if you listen to a lot of the narrative that's going through in the testimony, it's if you were raised evangelical, when people start talking about like we have authority over our kids, we must control our kids, and it gives you like those chills like that. I get that, and that's what they're saying. These senators and representatives are saying during these committees, and it makes me so sad. And one of the parental rights proponents said something like, you are here today because of your parents. And one of the opponents, a student, came up afterwards and she goes, no, some of us are here today not because of our parents, but in spite of our parents. And that just blew me away. And I think that's something to keep in mind. I mean, not all parents are great. And this is a bill that's just going to make those not so great parents have more authority over their kids' lives. Okay. I think the next one, this might be our last one. Okay, so people don't necessarily think this is an atheist issue. This is the trans sports ban, and it's going through both the House and the Senate. This is where I think that one of the only reasons that we have against LGBTQ equality is because of religion, and so this is. I think this is something that falls into our humanism, not necessarily maybe our atheism, but our humanism side of us should be like, we need to fight these bills with everything we have. So this is put forth in the House by Kaylee Tuck and Senator Stargel in the Senate side. And this bill can't even discriminate correctly. So it's a trans discrimination bill masquerading as women's rights, and its attack on our most vulnerable kids. It's only for trans girls. Doesn't have any language about trans boys whatsoever. So what it's going to do is going to prohibit trans girls from participating in girls' sports teams. And this is all the way from elementary school all the way up through college. So this includes public universities. There's a dispute resolution that's mentioned, which just was terrifying to me when they were talking about it, which it consists of a very, invasive medical exam for verification. I don't know how they distribute the results of this. It's kind of, the privacy issues kind of make me ill. There's currently an identical bill currently under federal injunction in Idaho. So this is the same thing that's under federal injunction currently, but we're trying to push it through here in Florida. Listening to this House, it passed the first House committee this past week, and it received a lot of attention. There's a lot of the best and worst of humanity we're seeing at this committee, and we can talk about that later because I know I'm running over. Sorry, but this will be heard by its first committee in the Senate on Tuesday. So that is that. I think. Sorry, I went way over. I got really excited.
A couple things I mentioned the anti-LGBTQ bills across the country. These are what we're seeing. These and bills preventing trans young people from getting medical care. So I think there's between maybe over 50 of these bills around the country, and they're passing in several different states, like Mississippi, for example, was recently, or was it Alabama? I think it might be.
It was Mississippi. Yeah.
Mississippi. Alabama is also considering it, and as is Louisiana. But regardless, we're seeing these all across the country, unfortunately. And like in past years, where it was just Idaho that passed one, we're going to see, unfortunately, a lot more of them this year that'll move in. On the other hand, these may very well be challenged at the federal level for not complying with federal law. So hopefully that will be the case.
And there is hope. The Utah governor just vetoed theirs, so it actually made it through the legislature, and their very conservative governor vetoed it. It didn't pass in South Carolina this past week, so there's hope. There's hope.
And the same for South Dakota. So everyone thought
did
it
it good.
was going to be passed, and that was, well, she wanted it to be more narrow in certain ways. She did not want it to extend to higher ed, just K through 12. So anyway, that might ultimately pass. But let's before we go into advocacy tools, let's see if we have any questions, Jocelyn, and maybe we could just keep it to just a few because I want to make sure we finish up.
Well, I was only going to ask the two questions, and you partly answered it that are to you, Allison, I guess, specifically, because Devin said she could stay longer. How does Florida compare to other states? You've now talked about it as it relates to trans bills, but what about for these other bills that we've been talking about? Is Florida leading the way, or are we part of the pack? Like, how do we compare nationally?
Yeah, it's leading the way in bad ways. In terms of vouchers, I mentioned that Florida is, if not the leader, among the state leaders across the country. We've seen more innovative bad legislation in Florida in the area of vouchers than anywhere else. And also the same is true for Project Blitz. Like, it was one of the first states to pass one of the In God We Trust in Schools bills, and several other bills that are associated with Project Blitz, like the Bible class bills, I think ultimately did not pass, but there are several other bills about prayer in schools that did pass. And several others. So we're seeing quite a few. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
That's okay. It was just a general question. The other question was talking about the broad denials of care that are now being potentially allowed. So we're also, are we seeing any cases of denials that are non-religious in nature? Like, have we seen this being pushed as far as, someone's health choices for their health being denied care? Are we seeing this yet?
We will. It hasn't passed yet. I mean, it just passed this past week in Arkansas, passed the legislature. It has not yet been signed by the governor. We are doing a big action alert push there along with other groups to try to get him to not sign it. We'll see what happens, but it's not actually in the law yet. And even once it is in the law, these things take time to see how it will actually be applied.
Okay.
However, if you are an insurance company, you have the opportunity to not pay, I think we're going to see it. But, we can't predict the future 100%.
Okay. So Arkansas is the first, in other words. And we're okay. All right. You can go into the close here then. All right. Thanks.
All right. Great. So Devin, I think you were going to take the first slide here.
Yeah, so the first thing we can all do is just track these bills. And there's a bill tracker on both the Senate site as well as the House site. I think the Senate's just a little bit better, but just personal preference. So just track these bills and just follow them through. When you see that a bill is on a committee's agenda, or even it's just been assigned to a committee, contact everyone on those committees, even the people that you think that are quote unquote friendly. For instance, the Moment of Silence bill, I thought that would be go down party lines in some cases. And at one point it went unanimously against us. So people that you think may be friendly towards our cause aren't always friendly. They just want to get it off their desk. So contact your legislatures, preferably calling them. Respond to action alerts as well. We just had one this past week just for Florida for the Bill of Wrongs, which is great. It would be great if everyone could submit written testimony as an individual or as a group is also great as well. Send it to all the legislators on those committees. And don't stop talking or even writing letters to the editor about these bills. Just getting awareness. Most people don't even know these things are happening unless they're really involved in it. So just having these types of talks, just getting the info out is super important. And even though we're in COVID times, if you are coming to Tallahassee, you still can testify. A lot of states are allowing you to Zoom in remotely, and that's not happening here. So if you are in Tally, you can testify directly inside the House. You have to have an appointment for it, and it's pretty easy to get. Or you can go to the Tucker Center, the Civic Center, which is half-mile away from the Capitol, to testify in the Senate. It's remote. It's weird, but it works, I guess. So that's all I had for that.
Florida doesn't really want people to testify, which would make you go to Tallahassee for most of this.
Someone tried to get central places around the state where you could testify from, and it didn't happen.
Yeah. Anyway, so other resources that we have, I mentioned the 2020 state report. It's available at atheist.org/states. and that has a scorecard for every state and the full report itself, which talks about all the categories and what they mean. There's also some nice maps to look at what individual laws look like across the country, and some really great sort of articles provided by our partners. Like there's one on homeschooling, for example, and what homeschooling laws look like across the country, and several others. So that can be really helpful to understand the issues more in depth. We also have more information about Project Blitz and what's been happening around the country at blitzwatch.org. We have on our website bill tracking as well. So just go to atheist.org and look up the legislative tracker, and that will show you the bills in every state, including Florida, that we're watching. I think we're well over, 400 now. I have to check, but quite a few. Not in Florida, all over the country. That'd be a lot. And lastly, we have data about non-religious people. In 2019, we did a survey of nearly 34,000 non-religious people across the country. And so we have data about their experiences, things that they believe in, issues that are important to them, issues they face in their daily lives, including, discrimination, including for different age ranges of people. So all that information is available at secularsurvey.org, and that could be helpful when you want to talk about how these various different bills and policies affect non-religious people, or you want to talk about what non-religious people care about. Like, for example, the most important issue for most people who took the survey that they flagged as being really critical and key was making sure to maintain secular public schools. So that was the number one issue among non-religious people we surveyed. And of course, that goes right up against the voucher program that we're seeing in Florida. So we can show how important this is and how much it matters to this population. And that's at secularsurvey.org. We also have a separate report that took out the people ages 18 to 24, and that's called the Tipping Point Generation. It's also available at that site. So if we want to talk about what's happening with younger non-religious people, that's available as well. And we're working on additional sort of subpopulation briefs so we can talk about different segments of our community. And lastly, I want to just flag, we have an action alert system. Devin just mentioned the action alerts that we just did this past week in Florida to oppose the Parents' Bill of Rights Act. So there's two different options here. You can do either or both. And if you were to, it's very straightforward. You just have to text states or schools to 1-855-465-5149. And then you will get a text back that takes you to the action alert that you can then easily sign up for and send to your lawmaker. So if you do states, it will send the 2020 State of the Secular States report to your lawmakers. And if you do schools, that is the Parents' Bill of Rights Act action alert, and that will go to the various different committees that are considering the Parents' Bill of Rights Act right now. Or you can do both. And the benefit of this also is that you'll be signed up for future alerts that we send out, so that other things that are happening in Florida you can find out about and take action on. So next slide just says questions. I'll leave it here for a second, but that's pretty much the end. So I wanted to give us a chance to take questions, and I can be 5 minutes late if we want to go over a little bit, Jocelyn.
Okay, I just wanted to be very respectful of your time and anyone else. If you have to leave now and you want to see the answers, we will be having the video on YouTube, so you will be able to see it later if you need to leave now. So some of the questions that have come up, and you guys have been awesome so far, and thank you for going over a bit. One of the questions was, if there's been a red wave this last year, should we be focusing in the future more on elections or individual bills? Like, people can only do so much. Which are you saying people focus on? And I think that's more of a Devin question, but I assume you both have thoughts on that.
I say elections, just because once the bills are already filed and in place, when there's a majority, a large majority, it doesn't matter it matters who's actually in the House. So once the bill is filed, it's already kind of set in stone. So yeah, that's me personally. Elections are more important.
Okay.
Well, we're not in an election year, so I think when we're not in an election year, we could focus more so on the bills. And also, the legislative session is usually in the first half of the year, as opposed to the second half, which is when elections are. Well, I don't know when your primaries are, but there is a little bit of difference there. Also, we and the groups we're all 501c3s, so we don't really participate, for or against different people in political races. Although we of course support get out the vote efforts, and so I think that's really key and really makes a difference in Florida and other states. Especially Florida's very close population, as far as divide, you know what I mean? It's not Mississippi and that there's a lot of people of one political orientation. It's much more close. And it's interesting. I was having this conversation with another person over I guess last week. It's in the states where there is the division of like political identity that we're seeing the most bad bills this year and also the most clashes. States like Arizona, states like Montana, that's where a lot of these negative bills are coming up. And that's actually where we have the most division in terms of, party, which is really interesting.
That is interesting. I can say that the county I live in, as of 2 years ago, there was almost 5,000 more of a certain party. So it was 5,000 more Republicans than Democrats. And now we're down to 206 more. So the numbers have changed dramatically. And we're seeing, yes, I would suspect that by being a little more contentious on one side or the other they're hoping will bring people out to vote and to do stuff. So they might be pushing what we consider the bad bills as a result of that, because it gets people out. All right, another question. Do other states have as many voucher programs as Florida? Have any other states successfully pushed voucher programs out after they've gotten such a strong hold?
No. The answer to the first one is no. Florida has, I think, the most. Now they vary in like so many different ways that it's hard to sort of characterize them. Florida has more than most, but some of them are framed as pilot programs. Some of them are smaller. They have different mechanisms. So you're comparing apples and oranges. It's hard to do that, right? But Florida is known for being a leader in this area. And I think if this consolidation bill does pass, it really does open the floodgate for them to keep expanding it. And this has been talked about as a way to ultimately undermine public education in Florida by continuously expanding this over time and basically diverting more money away from public education to private education. So as for pushing bills out, I'm aware of efforts to add in protections like non-discrimination protections, and I've seen bills for pushing out vouchers, but I don't know offhand if any have passed. I would guess that it is not a thing. Once you pass a voucher bill, it's actually kind of hard to get rid of it. And let me use Washington, D.C. as an example. We have a congressionally mandated voucher program in Washington, D.C., because, of course, we're subject to Congress, right? And they've been trying to get rid of it for years. The problem is once you have students in participating, they have a constituency of parents and students are participating in it. And then what do you do? What you cancel it? All those students would be forced out of the schools, right? And forced back into public schools. And so that creates an inherent roadblock, because then you have to have like partial years or come up with other solutions. So it becomes difficult to stop it. And that's just one example of why.
That makes sense. Wow. Okay. Another question. Can doctors withhold appropriate care to someone if they believe in non-medical intervention on some procedure, or in failure to providing appropriate medicine if they don't believe in drugs? And this is related, I'm sure, to the Medical Ethics and Diversity Act. And I took that from the chat box.
Yeah. So I'm not exactly sure what you mean. I mean, doctors have the right to their medical judgment. I mean, they have the ability to use their professional expertise and medical judgment to decide, whether people should be assigned medication. And doctors disagree about things. So when we're talking about non-medical decision-making, we're talking about explicitly based on things like, religion or personal beliefs, as opposed to medical differences of opinion, if that makes sense. So I know it's kind of a gray line there, but I don't know if that's helpful.
No, I think that makes sense. Another question related to the same thing is, can the Medical Ethics and Diversity Act theoretically deny care to someone based on sexual orientation?
Theoretically, certainly. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
I could see maybe like a doctor is Catholic, does not want to prescribe birth control, maybe, and would prefer that you do the rhythm method or something like that instead.
It's already allowed in Florida law, actually.
Are you serious? Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure contraception is already covered. But there might be exceptions. But
this, I think the question here was more about care in general, meaning you don't want to treat people for anything from the LGBTQ community and deny them service. I mean, that would be, or race or anything else. I mean, so if it's my, deeply held belief X, and I'm just going to deny you the flu shot, I'm going to deny you coming into my private practice. Can they go that far?
Well, there are non-discrimination protections in the law. So I think then you're going to get into a more complex situation where you have to look at the actual non-discrimination protections. And then it also matters what people say they're denying, right? Like, for example, when it comes to trans medical care, it's often framed as being sort of specialized in a way that it's really not specialized. Like, for example, I don't know, let's use a hysterectomy, right? So trans men may very well want to get a hysterectomy as part of their transition. Also, non-trans women get hysterectomies all the time for different reasons having to do with cancer, right? And so, they might frame it in terms of, well, I won't perform a hysterectomy for this reason, and they'll frame it differently, even though it's just because of the person's identity. So it's a complex situation, but it's definitely a lot more latitude to deny medical care that's needed under this bill.
Right. Wow. Dark days. But we're doing something about it, and that's what matters. And I have come to the end of the questions. If anybody else has any last questions, now is the time to throw them into chat. If not, then I am going to, and I see someone's not taking notes. The slides and information will be accessible later. Yes, I see that comment. That will be accessible later. The YouTube video will be up soon, so you'll be able to get the information there as well. So thank you both for coming. This is extremely important work. It is clear that it takes a lot of time and a lot of organization and a lot of effort for everyone involved, but particularly Devin going and talking all the time in Tallahassee. It's just, yes, we give you much thanks for being there and essentially taking one for the team, because it takes a lot of work to do that.
It can be brutal, but I think it's kind of fun.
Well, it's glad that
weird version of fun.
I'm glad you enjoy it, because that's the type of person that we want to have in Tallahassee. And as an affiliate organization of American Atheists, I want to say that we appreciate the work you do on behalf of all Floridians, including those who may not even know it, but the good work and a good fight. So thank you also to all of our attendees who've joined us in Zoom or YouTube. In addition to all our online activities that keep us connected, I wanted to talk about a few in-person events that are coming up. I teased it at the beginning. Now I'm going to tell you. So we are helping the city of Orlando with an annual volunteer effort at the Bill Frederick Park in Orlando. And this is a Green Up Orlando program. It's going to provide all the tools and equipment we need. Park entries waived. This is from about 8:45 in the morning to 11:30 on April 17th, Saturday. We're going to be meeting a few minutes early because t-shirts, people who come get t-shirts. How awesome is that? Although I will say it's a first arrive, you get the best size. I can't guarantee that we will have all sizes, but please come and help us out, because we're now starting to do these in-person events, and we're planning on staying and picnicking after the event. The following weekend, the CFFC is going to have a table and tent at the 16th annual Central Florida Earth Day. That's Sunday, April 25th from 10 to 4. It's a little shorter than usual. Earth Day is family friendly, pet friendly, smoke free, and free to attend. And we would love to have help tabling. If you have time, please reach out to us on Meetup or Facebook and let us know that you want to help out, or just drop by and say hi. We're now getting, more and more of us are getting vaccinated. Please come out and let us know that you're around. And finally, the CFFC is participating in this year's National Secular Week of Action, which is April 30th through May 9th. We're going to be collecting and donating supplies for local shelters and those who are in housing distress. Please keep a lookout for an announcement that's going to provide details on the need and how you can help out. We're going to have an in-person event to organize the supplies, but we also need just donations of goods, funds to help purchase goods. Please help us make this event a success, whether you can help us purchase supplies or just show up and help sort and prepare them. It's all good. You know, the more time we spend on this, the better it's going to be. And I want to hopefully start seeing more and more of you in the future. So we have a lot going on in April, relatively speaking. So you're going to probably announce just one educational event like today's for the month. So please stay tuned for that as well. So with that in mind, until it's safe to meet indoors, we are going to continue our online social meetups, Free Thought Cafes, the Secular Women's events as Zoom meetings. You can join us from anywhere in the world. We just had somebody from the UK pop into our cafe event last week. You know, you just never know who's going to show up. To find out how you can join us, you need to sign up on Meetup at meetup.com/CFL Freethought. That is also where you're going to find out all the details on the park cleanup for the City of Orlando, Table of Earth Day, and our volunteer event when it gets posted. If you want to be in touch, our email is info@cflfreethought.org. And again, if you want the upcoming activity emails, you can sign up at tinyurl.com/CFFC newsletter. And with that, I'll bid everyone farewell. And until we can see you again, stay safe, keep looking out for one another. Thank you so much. Thank you, Devin and Allison, so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's been wonderful. It's great that we're able to have this conversation and share.
Oh, yeah. It's a big conversation.